All right, Travis, if you didn't hear the little robot, recording is now in progress. Um, I want to know first, in your words, before we go anywhere, tell me what Ruthless Pro Wrestling is.
Thank you for asking first and foremost, and thank you for having me. Ruthless Pro Wrestling is an independent wrestling company based out of Toledo, Ohio, but covers essentially the entirety of the Midwest. It's founded in 2019 and is now currently run and promoted by Chris Kohlenberg. We specialize in independent pro wrestling with a very heavy emphasis in the very high stakes world of deathmatch wrestling. So I'm commentary for the organization, one half of the commentary team, and I've been with the team since early 2021.
I'd say that's not a very common thing to wind up involved in. So let's take it back a little bit to your childhood. What it was it exactly that latched you onto wrestling in the first place?
So I'm 36 years old. I'm a card carrying millennial. I grew up in what's affectionately known as like the Monday Night Wars era of mainstream professional wrestling. As a very impressionable 11-year-old, specifically the build up from 1996 to 1997 to build up to Sting versus Hulk Hogan at WCW Starrcade 97. I remember specifically hooking me in. There was a guy at the apartment complex I was living in at the time who was very excited about professional wrestling and basically promoted me into it. I ended up watching the show and I was kind of hooked from there. So yeah, ever since I was like 11 years old, been into it.
Okay. And so when you first started watching it then, who was the wrestler that you latched onto first? Like can you remember the first wrestler that you
Oh,
wanted to be like?
Sting, without a question. It's got to be Sting. Sting was the coolest, even before I came into wrestling and stumbled my way into it as like an awkward 11-year-old. Like Sting was the coolest, bar none. And then at the time that I came in, he was like the anti-hero of WCW at the time. Like very cool presentation at the time. Very cool. Yeah, he was and still is the best. Was literally performing last night at one of the craziest levels I've ever seen.
Nice. I'm not going to pretend that I know anything about wrestling. So let's say that for any audience members who don't know anything about wrestling, can you explain like the combination of what exactly goes into it?
Yeah, so I mean, a wrestling show is not very much unlike going to like a local concert or like a organized performance that you would go see live anywhere, like a Broadway show or anything like that. You essentially have a promotion or a company, in this case, for an example, Ruthless Pro Wrestling, who picks a date and picks a location and says, we are putting on a show. And then we then get wrestlers from all over in the independent wrestling scene. You rely heavily on both people from your region and from around to kind of draw people to your show. And then you promote the hell out of the show. People come out, and then the show happens. And then it's from there.
So do you handle any of the promotion for Ruthless Pro Wrestling?
I mean, listen, yes. And I think anybody who operates at the independent level will tell you that it's almost a very all hands on deck. When I say I do commentary for Ruthless Pro Wrestling, that's just one of many hats that a lot of us end up wearing in the situations that we find ourselves in. But yeah, we end up doing a lot of promotion. I end up helping a lot with the social media side of things as well, and I actually do a lot of video content creation for us as well to help further promote the brand and get our name out there further.
Now, you are one of the commentators. So would you say you spend more time behind the scenes or actually on site doing work for?
Oh, definitely behind the scenes. Oh, goodness. The actual commentary, because if you think about it, the actual act of what I do for calling a match only lasts as long as the show is. So if the show is only 3 to 4 hours, that is the only window of time that I'm actually doing commentary. Everything else in like the month leading up to the show, because generally speaking at the indie level, you're doing shows on a month-to-month basis. Some people have different cadences and different, schedules or what have you, but that's a general rule of thumb is a month-to-month basis. You spend that entire time, as soon as one show ends, sometimes even not as the show ends, you're already working on stuff for the next show, getting your notes in order. So for me personally, I take a lot of notes. I tend to watch a lot of the guys that we book on in other promotions to kind of get an idea of their body of work. So I spend a lot of time, and then a lot of my time and research goes into when I'm, creating content, like video content. So it's, oh my goodness, it's definitely I'd say 80-20 to be to be generous. Yeah.
Okay. So when did you, obviously you knew that you liked wrestling. What was it that kicked off in your mind the spark that you wanted it to be your career?
So I think every kid who ever watches professional wrestling gets the bug that I want to do this. You watch the guys in the ring and you say, wow, this is the coolest thing in the entire world. How do I get involved? How do I do this? There were a couple instances in my life where I made attempts at maybe trying to, test the waters as far as actually getting into a ring. And I'll just go ahead and quantify this now by saying I am not an athlete in any capacity. There are stories that could probably be told of to support my lack of athleticism. But that's the beautiful thing about professional wrestling is that it's in a production and it takes multiple people to help bring the production together. So you need somebody to book the show. You need somebody to announce the guys to the ring. You need somebody to call the show, if it's broadcast on any sort of broadcasting services like we are. There's a lot of hands that go into it. And for me to actually go through the journey and find my personal niche that I think worked for me to lend myself to this industry and this business, awesome, man. Like I said, your path might go in different ways. A lot of people start in one thing and transition to another.
So now where you are with the commentary, do you feel like this is where you have been led to, or do you feel like this is another stepping stone for something else you may be interested in?
Oh, I would never say never to anything. If the opportunity came up to parlay my experience into maybe a production standpoint, I would obviously jump at the opportunity. But any opportunity that comes your way, especially in an industry like this, you tend to jump on it and try to make the most of it when it happens. And the cool thing about independent wrestling, and if you can roll with the punches well enough, opportunities will present themselves. Things will pop up for you to do.
Okay, so let's talk about the opportunities that you have with Ruthless Pro Wrestling. Do you prepare for your commentary based on what is scripted, or are you basically just getting in the headspace, getting in there, and then entertaining?
So I actually notoriously had a conversation with our booker yesterday because I was hanging out with him for a little bit. Shouts out to Chris Kohlenberg, owner and booker of Ruthless Pro Wrestling. I had a conversation with him yesterday when we were talking about the upcoming show, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I notoriously do not want to know what's going to happen at our shows. For me personally, I do a lot of preparation in terms of trying to learn as much I can about the guys and girls that we're bringing in for any particular show and their history and their background and what they're bringing to the show. But I don't, from a commentator's perspective, I don't want to know what's going to happen at the show because it lends itself to a more organic experience if I'm calling the action as it's actually happening and I'm reacting to it in real time. You're going to engage with it a lot more organically than you would if I, had 2 hours, 3 hours of previous knowledge of what was going to happen and had time to get in my own head and formulate those thoughts ahead of time.
So do you feel like it took you a while to find a balance with the other co-commentators that you have? And how many, and also in the same question, how many co-commentators are there?
So when we initially started, there were 3 of us, and we've now pared it down to a 2-man team. And I'm very fortunate that my brother in arms, Peapod, he is an absolute brother to me, former roommates, friends for over a decade, a true brother to me. So I am fortunate in the fact that I get to sit at a broadcast table with one of my brothers. And so a conversation with him about pro wrestling as it's happening is as natural and organic to me as, as just, talking to you right now. Like it's something that just feels like natural to us. So we, there's always going to be times where you're going to, try to work around each other and work over each other. But we've got good chemistry, and I think we've done a pretty good job thus far.
Awesome. So then how many shows have you guys done now that you've been down to 2? I know you guys said that you're on monthly.
I'm going to count it here, actually. I'm not going to count because I've already given up. I'm going to say about a handful, maybe, at this point that we've done as a 2-man team. So our actual first outing as a 2-man team was last year at the first RPW outing at the ICW No Holds Barred Deathmatch Circus, which is, the event that we're going to be running coming up next this coming weekend, July 2nd. So our first time as a duo was at the inaugural Inked in Blood. And then we've been a duo basically ever since. So with the exception of our former broadcast colleague, Dusty, if he checks this out, shouts out, still a good brother of ours, good friend. He popped in for, I think, another show or two, but since then it's been a duo ever since.
Okay. So with pro wrestling and indie wrestling, can you tell me what the biggest differences are? If somebody hears indie wrestling, they might jump to think like it's not anywhere near the level of what goes into regular wrestling. Can you tell me the differences both in size and scope as well as production level, like the amount of production that goes into it?
Absolutely. So I'd say for most general discerning fans, I should say, the main differentiator would be TV. So your independent wrestling organizations are generally owned by themselves, like it's a solely owned entity, which isn't necessarily true because WWE, well, no longer they're a publicly owned entity. I shouldn't say that, but at one point when they were the biggest game in town, they were a privately owned entity. So, it's really just initially I wanted to say budget because trust me, we wish we had the budget that some of the bigger, household promotions, but you're like your WWEs, your AEWs, for those familiar, your brands that have been established on TV like Impact Wrestling or a Ring of Honor, brands that have been established for a while kind of escape that indie moniker. And then you have the indie scene, which is almost like a rekindling or a spiritual successor to the old territory days of how wrestling used to be before the cable boom, kind of erupted everything into the mainstream the way that it is. But yeah, I mean, the budget would probably be the primary thing, but I also like to liken it to how football fans will akin NCAA football or collegiate level football to like the professionals. At the collegiate level, you have guys who are essentially trying to get to that next level and playing what some would argue harder to get noticed to get to that next level, because you want to get drafted and to an NFL team so you can get that big contract. If you're an independent wrestler and involved in independent wrestling, generally speaking, and some people may tell you otherwise, but a good blanket of independent wrestlers will tell you that the idea is to get noticed and to get your stock up to the point that you can get on TV and you can make this your full-time 100% taxable career as a professional wrestler. So I think that would be the biggest distinction.
Okay. So when people say use the word fake about wrestling, what would your response be? Is that something that lightweight triggers you? And if so, what do you think? What do you think to that? Because it's scripted, does that mean it's fake?
I wouldn't go as far as to say that it triggers me, because my position is I like to educate people on professional wrestling and maybe kind of change the narrative a little bit of how they're perceiving it to kind of open their eyes a little bit more to like, oh, maybe I am kind of approaching this the wrong way. Because here's the thing that I think wrestling gets caught up in, because it is an athletic sport and because it is, athletically based. The second that people get in on or hip to the fact that it is quote unquote fake or predetermined or whatever the case may be to, further the storylines, the initial reaction a lot of people have is to kind of go, oh, well, it's fake. Well, okay, but once you divorce yourself from that and you realize that we're just taking athletes and who also are, good at performing in a way to advance a storyline, and we're using them in that capacity to come up with creative stories and angles that you can only really tell in this medium, that would be a counter. And then I would also counter with this, like, you have to have a certain level of suspension of disbelief to buy into what you're taking in. So I'll akin it to like a Marvel movie. Everybody knows that, Iron Man doesn't actually exist. There isn't a billionaire out there with a suit flying around fighting crime. But
Right.
Nobody's going to the Iron Man movie calling it fake. You watch something like WWE and you see somebody like a character like a Bray Wyatt who, was like a supernatural-esque character. Everybody knows that there's not spooky dudes that every time they get into a fight, red lights come down and, fill the area that they're in, and they wear masks and stuff like that and do crazy supernatural stuff. The second you see that, you should know that what you're watching is not based in reality. Once you can get past that fact and then divorce yourself from that, and then you can find ways to enjoy the product without being cynical about it. You find performers or different genres, it just like any other entertainment medium, there's different, genres or subgenres within the medium. You have your high flying lucha libre style for fans of more like athletic style. You have like big Haas wrestlers who will just pummel the hell out of each other, or people who liked, the Mountain on Game of Thrones. You've got a little bit of something for everybody. You just have to get past that inaugural suspension of your disbelief, which it shouldn't take long. Just watch a little bit of the product and you'll find a reason to suspend your disbelief.
So I think that's put very well. Now, when it comes to your wrestling, you had mentioned, there's multiple different kinds, but when it comes to the wrestling and Ruthless Pro Wrestling, is it just specifically focused on one type of wrestling, or do you ever do any other kinds? Like, you had mentioned Libre and like Lucha Libre, and you had mentioned we had talked about sumo earlier. So I was just curious if there was anything else that you guys as a label or as a company have ever explored or talked about exploring.
Oh, we will literally book any type of wrestling that appeals to us. One of the cool things about our positioning is that, or the type of positioning that we've tried to angle ourselves at, I feel like, is that we can be a platform for more than just deathmatch wrestling in the Midwest and in our region. So not only are we showcasing, something that would be considered by a lot to be the outlier of professional wrestling, or one of the more further extreme parts of professional wrestling with deathmatch wrestling. And that is a very heavy emphasis for us. But we focus a lot of attention on matches and up and coming stars who don't necessarily fit that niche. Our world champion, Justin Kyle, who actually just surpassed 1 year with the Ruthless Pro World Heavyweight Championship. He does death matches, and he's dabbled into the world, and he's definitely got himself a resume. But in our world, in Ruthless Pro Wrestling, he has very seldom dipped his world out into the realm of death match. He's just a straight up monster of a man who runs through everybody like a Mack truck becomes sentient. Like, it's a sight to see. You should check it out. He's something else.
So are you ever involved in booking the talent, or do you just get excited when you see who comes in?
There's a couple of times where Chris will book a talent or book a match And I'll jokingly tell him and remind him that my birthday is not until January, because I'll get that excited and say, hey, boss, you didn't have to do this, just for me. This is really cool. But there's sometimes where he'll surprise us and say, hey, we're bringing in X, Y, or Z. And I'll say, oh, awesome, cool, like super awesome. Like I've been a fan of them for a while. So, but there are also instances where, it is a very, cooperative and collaborative process where all the people involved will vocalize. It's just a natural byproduct of being involved. If you're involved, you're passionate. And if you're passionate, you're going to make it known, So there's not a day that goes by that I'm not in Chris's inbox with some stupid booking idea. Or the one time I pitched him a series of shows named after songs from Batman soundtracks. Like I wanted to do Hold Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me, Thrill Me. And then I wanted to do Kiss from a Rose. And then there was another one I wanted to do. There was like 3 of them, but that didn't fly. That didn't fly very far.
It didn't go anywhere.
No, that didn't really go anywhere. This is why I'm in the position that I'm in and he's in the position he's in, because
Got you. So with Ruthless Pro Wrestling, you have a show coming up. Obviously,
yes.
You said you have stuff coming out monthly, just like comic books, story-wise. So the next chapter, is that what's coming, is essentially what's coming up is following what happened in the last wrestling match?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, and some people will probably argue otherwise. Some people are really into wrestling for the physicality of it all. Me personally, I like story a lot, and I like to see, continuity from a brand, and hopefully we're hitting that. And you'll see a lot of continuity from past shows coming up, at our upcoming show, which cheap plug is July 2nd. It's called Inked in Blood 2 Dead by Dawn. It's going to be live on IWTV. You guys can check that out, streaming live 3 p.m. Eastern. It's part of a 2-day event, the ICW No Holds Barred Deathmatch Circus, returning back to Michigan July 1st and 2nd in Maybee, Michigan. But yeah, like there's there's absolutely.
And so for people who can't be in Maybee, Michigan, they can check it out on IWTV.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I kind of lost track of where I was going with that when I got too sidetracked plugging the show.
That's okay.
But yeah, I'm sorry.
We were talking about. You were just essentially we were just talking about the show, so you kind of explained.
You will see overlap, and I do. And to your point, the show will be streaming live on IWTV. You guys can check it out on there. To your point, check out if you guys don't have an IWTV subscription already, go get one. If you do, check out our back catalog, because you will be able to see the events that led us up to this point, including the inaugural Inked in Blood from last year's Deathmatch Circus, which already a card that in some small circles lives in infamy. So very, very cool. So yeah, you can check that out and definitely see the story that's kind of led us up to this point that we're getting into.
Okay, awesome. Is there anything that you want to tease story wise, or is it all kind of locked down?
No. You're gonna have to tune in. You're gonna have to tune in July 2nd.
Okay, awesome. So is there anything else you'd like to plug before I let you go?
No, I mean, if you guys are checking this out, check us out IWTV live for Inked in Blood 2 Dead by Dawn. You guys can find out more information on our socials. All of those are linked on our website, ruthlesspro.com. You guys check us out on there. Upcoming events will be announced on there and on all of our socials. We got a YouTube, a Twitter, a Facebook page. You got that's really about it. Make sure you guys are tuned in. If you are going to be live in maybe Michigan, make sure you guys are tuned in to Inked in Blood 2 Dead by Dawn. It's going to be a banger. It's got a very, very stacked card. It's getting tweaked a little bit still, a little bit to the final touches on it, little icings on the cake. So I don't want to announce too much or give away too much right now, but it's going to be a banger. And if you guys are uninitiated, this will be a good time to jump in.
Okay. Awesome. That was a great time. I appreciate you stopping by, and make sure you stay safe.
Thank you. You stay safe as well. And thank you for your time, man. I appreciate you.
Of course, man.